Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof.com. I'm pleased to be joined by Juan Passarelli, who's the filmmaker behind the war on journalism, the case of Julian Assange. He's been working on filming WikiLeaks for 10 years. He put a lot into this film, which I had a chance to see, and I encourage you to go watch it because he manages to distill and condense a lot of information into 30 minutes. And there's a lot going on in this case. And I also note that his shirt that he's wearing is Curious Eyes Never Run Dry, a statement in the logs, the chat logs, that has taken on new meaning. The US government's tried to criminalize it. Of course, you're reclaiming it and saying it's a virtue, it's something to celebrate, that transparency activists would want to expose government corruption. So welcome, Juan.
Thank you, Kevin.
And to begin, why don't you share some of your backstory, how you came to work on this film, introduce yourself to people, make sure everyone knows where you're coming from here in producing this documentary.
Okay, so I came to the UK 10 years ago to study a master's in TV journalism, but my objective really was to learn investigative skills and to be able to use that to make documentaries. I happened to run across Gavin McFadden, who ran the Center for Investigative Journalism, in where I met Sarah Harrison and Joseph Farrell just months before they joined WikiLeaks. And then I was contacted by them to film them for the Iraq War Logs release. So I was there for a couple of weeks filming behind the scenes. And I saw how important this subject was, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, and you've managed to gain some good appreciation for what you do. And how do you feel, as you push this film out for people? What are you hoping this film can serve, and how do you see it helping the efforts to support Julian as we enter this 3 to 4 week hearing for him that's going to be unfolding in London?
Well, I planned this film as a sort of a campaign film, but it's taken a life of its own. And I think it's because there has been so much disinformation for 10 years. I mean, you're talking about the propaganda apparatuses of 5 different nations: Ecuador, the US, the UK, Sweden, and they're all, and Australia as well. They've all been putting their utmost effort into trying to disinform the population. And of course, just even in the publications, there is a massive amount being said about WikiLeaks. But what I tried to do was set myself in a mind frame of people who have ordinary lives and just suddenly hear about WikiLeaks here and there and don't know about it every day, which is the case with me. And also the people who were 8 at the time of the releases in 2010 are now 18. They're able to vote. They're politically active, or can be politically active if they choose so. So I thought I needed to just remove all those layers of information that has been brought about by 10 years and just simplify it. This is really a simple case. This is a journalist and a publisher who exposed war crimes and is now being persecuted for exposing those war crimes under the Espionage Act, which does not have a First Amendment defense. And the MOJ actually has said that he does not have a First Amendment defense, even if the espionage wasn't there, because he's a foreigner.
Yeah, it's a very simple case.
I mean, that was my mindset, and I think it was really something that the public took very well. It's taken a life of its own, and I'm getting such an enormous feedback from it. So there obviously was a need for something simple to summarize a 10-year case, which has been literally lawfare against one man.
You make a good point about this in the fact that the passage of time isn't just an issue of injustice, because you would expect, and this is how his lawyers argue, you would expect that a government would charge you earlier than now, because that is a factor in bringing these kinds of criminal cases. You don't want it to be so far along that the people involved can't actually remember the events accurately and present them in a court of law. But the passage of time also, as you're saying, is the younger people who have no awareness at all of what happened with these disclosures. I was an adult. I was able to pay attention to Chelsea Manning's disclosures and know what was in these documents. But there are people out there who have no idea what these materials are that we're even talking about. And their concept of WikiLeaks is unfortunately defined by everything that's happened in the last 3 to 4 years. So you can't really understand WikiLeaks from the last 3 to 4 years.
No, you can't. And I mean, their concept of WikiLeaks is basically fed to them by the mass media, who more and more seem to be more a mouthpiece for government officials rather than investigative journalists or journalists that dig deeper. And this case is the epitome of that. I remember 10 years ago. I hate to talk about the accusations, but I'll tell you this example. When the oldest trick in the book, when the publications came out, they said WikiLeaks might have already blood on their hands. When the media published, they removed the might. So they said WikiLeaks has blood on their hands, and that's the way the media apparatus works, unfortunately. Although I have to say, there has been a change, especially in the big newspapers that were also involved in the disclosures. We've seen editorials from the New York Times, from the Guardian, from the ex-editor of the Guardian, Alan Rusbridger. He's written 3 articles about it, all saying how this case could potentially end journalism as we know it, and in that respect, end democracy. Because if journalists are not allowed to say what the government is doing in your name, you're not able to hear and understand what governments do in your name, and that means that you don't have the information to do an appraised decision as to who should you choose as a leader.
Yeah, and one thing you communicate with your film, which I think is really important, is that this is unprecedented, not only because it could potentially mean that Julian Assange is brought to the United States, but I think through your film, you're letting people know that it's already unprecedented. That there's a lot of future tense when these press freedom groups talk about it. They talk about it mostly when they're focusing on the United States and what could happen to the United States. But for the world, there's already been a significant precedent that has been set. And that's something that hasn't been fully grappled with, how everything has shifted. And I think your film does a good job of starting to deal with what has been altered and affected by the US bringing this prosecution.
I'm so glad you mentioned it, because I firmly believe, people talk about the president that will be set if he is extradited. The president has already been set, both in the United States and in the rest of the world. If we allow, at the moment that espionage charges were brought upon an individual outside the jurisdiction of the United States, the US is already expanding its grasp and applying its laws to other countries to try and get at whoever they deem, as Pompeo says, a hostile entity. let's just imagine what would happen if the New York Times or the Guardian, the Spiegel, Le Monde, El País got information of relevance equal to the Snowden revelations or the Chelsea Manning revelations. Would they publish right now? At the very worst, they would publish and be arrested for it, or at the very worst, they would publish very little, which would mean that the precedent has worked. We're not going to be receiving the information that we so desperately need in order to take informed decisions about the government. And definitely the media will not be able to hold power and government to account, because they will make decisions based on their own safety. And that is the case right now.